At 2 in the morning, my brother dragged me out of bed and tossed me into the yard, yelling that I wasn't real family. My parents simply stood at the window and watched. I crawled back inside, and what followed made the entire neighborhood call the police. You know that gut-wrenching feeling? That soul-crushing realization when the people who are supposed to protect you, the ones you call family, actively choose to watch you break. For years, I lived in that silent agony, a ghost in my own home. But the night they let my brother throw me out into the freezing darkness like I was nothing but trash, that was the night everything changed. And it wasn't just my world that shattered. My name is Noah, and I'm 23. Growing up, our family probably looked pretty normal from the outside. You know, classic suburban setup. 2 parents, a younger brother, and me, the oldest. My dad worked long hours, my mom was always home, and my brother Ethan, well, he was the golden child, the one everyone adored. I was the quiet one, the bookworm, the kid who loved music, the one who never caused trouble. Or at least, that's what people liked to call me. Inside our house, it was a completely different story. Ethan could do no wrong. Every tiny accomplishment of his was celebrated like he'd just cured a disease. A soccer goal. My parents would post about it online for days. Me acing a difficult exam. Barely a nod. If Ethan forgot to do his chores, oh, he was just tired, or he had a lot going on. If I forgot, I was lazy, ungrateful, irresponsible. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just normal sibling stuff. You know, the way kids are treated differently. But as time went on, it became terrifyingly clear. This wasn't rivalry. This was blatant favoritism. And the older I got, the more painful it became. By high school, Ethan had truly mastered the art of being cruel when no one else was looking. He'd shove me into walls in the hallway. He'd mock me in front of his friends, calling me the spare, or the accident. When I dared to tell my parents, they'd just shake their heads and laugh. Boys will be boys, my dad would say, usually adding, you probably provoked him anyway. My mom. She'd just sigh and tell me not to make waves. I quickly learned there was no point. If something happened between me and Ethan, I was on my own, completely alone. Then came that night. The night everything finally snapped. It started like any other, really. I'd been up late, finishing some freelance work. Around 2 a.m., just as I was drifting off, strong hands grabbed me. Before I could even wake up properly, I was yanked out of bed, my arm twisted painfully. Get up, loser, Ethan hissed. I stumbled, half asleep, heart pounding, utterly disoriented. He dragged me through the silent house towards the back door, his grip bruising. What are you doing? I croaked, my voice thick with sleep and fear. You don't belong here, he spat, shoving me forward. You're not real family. Mom and Dad don't even want you here. You're just taking up space. His words cut deeper than any physical blow ever could. He flung the door open and shoved me outside into the cold, damp yard. I tripped on the steps, hitting the wet grass hard. The shock of it jolted me fully awake. I looked up, stunned as Ethan loomed in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the kitchen light. And then I saw them. My parents. Standing right there at the window, just watching. Not moving. Not saying a word. Just watching as their youngest son threw me out into the night like a piece of trash. Ethan, stop. I called out, my voice cracking, a desperate plea. Maybe, just maybe, they'd step in this time. Maybe they'd finally defend me. But Dad just folded his arms. Mom turned her face away. Ethan sneered, a sickening triumph in his voice. See? They don't care. They never did. You're nothing here, Noah. Nothing. He slammed the door shut, the lock clicking into place with a chilling finality. I sat there in the wet grass, shivering, staring up at the dark, indifferent window. A flicker of anger started deep in my chest. It grew hotter with each ragged breath. My whole life, I'd been patient. I'd swallowed their words, their blatant favoritism, their deafening silence. But in that moment, as I eventually crawled back to the door, hands shaking, knees damp with dirt, I realized something inside me had broken. And something new, something hard and dangerous, had begun to take its place. I pushed the back door open. He'd actually left it unlocked. I stumbled inside, dripping with cold and humiliation. The house was silent again, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It hummed heavy with unspoken tension, waiting. My parents' bedroom door was shut. Ethan's faint, muffled laughter echoed from upstairs. My heart pounded. My mind raced. Before I even understood what was happening, I knew something massive was coming. Something loud enough to wake the entire neighborhood. But to understand why, you need to understand just how deep the cracks in this family ran. Why what came next wasn't just an accident. It was the brutal culmination of years of silence, cruelty, and betrayal, all boiling over in one single night. That morning, after I'd been thrown out, the house felt colder than the damp grass I'd just been on. My clothes clung to me, and every creak of the floorboards felt like the house itself was trying to remind me I didn't belong. Upstairs, Ethan's laughter still bled through the walls. He was probably relishing his victory. My parents' door remained shut, their silence deliberate, heavy. I went back to my room, shut the door, and sat on my bed. It was then I realized this wasn't some random act. That moment in the yard. It was just the boiling point. Everything had been building for years. I had been conditioned to believe my place in this family was to be a shadow, uncelebrated, undefended, unseen. The more I thought about it, the more every chipped away piece of me came flooding back. Christmas mornings, Ethan's pile of expensive gifts dwarfed mine. Mom would say, "Ethan's still growing. He needs things." Dad would shrug, "You're older. You don't need toys." But it wasn't about toys. It was about what those gifts represented: Ethan's joy, my parents' approval, my own muted excitement always brushed aside. Even birthdays weren't mine. My 16th birthday, a milestone I'd dreamt of. No party, not even a dinner out. But when Ethan turned 13, they rented out an entire hall, invited the whole neighborhood. "It's his bar mitzvah of becoming a teenager," Dad joked. Even though we weren't religious, they made it sound like Ethan was royalty ascending a throne, and I was just there to set up balloons. And school. I worked myself to the bone, studying late, desperately trying to carve out a future that would get me out. Straight A's. Mom would glance at the report card. "Good. That's what we expect." Ethan scraping by with C's. "Pizza night." He tried his best, Dad would beam. Every moment like that left me feeling smaller, invisible. Like my effort only mattered if it made Ethan look good by comparison. Ethan knew it, too. He wielded that favoritism like a weapon. If I didn't lend him my things, he'd run to Mom, claiming I was selfish. She'd scold me. If I tried to defend myself, Ethan would twist the story, say I hit him. He was a master at playing the victim, and I was always the villain. My parents never questioned his word. Never. One of the worst moments came after I got my first job at a local coffee shop. I was so proud, earning my own money. Finally, something that was mine. I saved for weeks, bought a used laptop for school and freelance work. Within days, Ethan was on it, downloading games, crumbs everywhere. When I tried to stop him, he just smirked. Mom said, "You should let me. We're family. We share." When I complained to her, she sided with him. "He's younger, Noah. Be the bigger person. Being the bigger person became the mantra of my life. No matter what Ethan did, I was always supposed to absorb it. He lied. I swallowed it. He pushed. I stood still. He stole. I let it go. All while my parents praised him for his confidence and charm. But the real breaking point before that night? That came a month earlier, at dinner. Dad casually mentioned he was thinking of updating the will. Ethan smirked at me across the table. Well, obviously I'm getting the house. You'll probably get Dad's old golf clubs or something. I laughed bitterly, asking why he'd say that. Before Ethan could even answer, Mom chimed in, smiling. Well, it makes sense. You're independent. You'll figure things out. Ethan, he'll need more support. That sentence. It haunted me. It wasn't just about money. It was the gut punch confirmation of everything I'd always felt. They saw me as expendable. A placeholder. Someone who didn't need their care, didn't deserve their protection, and wasn't entitled to anything, not even belonging. So, when Ethan dragged me into the yard that night, and my parents just watched, it wasn't shocking. It was consistent. It was exactly who they had always been. And yet, seeing it so raw, so undeniable, set off a storm inside me. My fists clenched. My jaw ached. For the first time, I didn't just feel hurt. I felt angry. Angry enough that I couldn't sleep. Angry enough that I started to really think about what I was going to do next. That's when things shifted from silent agony to the chaotic storm that would wake the neighbors, and then some. Sleep was impossible. My chest felt like a drum pounding from the inside. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's smug grin, the door slamming, my parents' blank faces. I replayed it, searching for any flicker of hesitation, any sign they cared. But there was nothing. Their silence had been deliberate. That truth hollowed me out. Around dawn, still in my damp shirt, I crept to the kitchen for water. The house was quiet, except for the soft clinking of dishes. Mom was at the sink, humming as if nothing had happened. She glanced over her shoulder when I walked in. "Morning," she said casually, like she hadn't just watched her son get tossed outside hours earlier. I froze. "That's it? Morning." My voice cracked, sharp, louder than I intended. She frowned, like I was being unreasonable. "Don't start, Noah. You know your brother gets hot-headed sometimes. You should have just stayed quiet instead of provoking him." The words hit me like ice water. Provoking him. He dragged me out of bed. He threw me outside in the middle of the night and you two just watched. She turned back to the sink, shoulders stiff. "You're exaggerating. You're always so dramatic. If it were that bad, your father would have stepped in." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her until she saw me. But I just stood there gripping the counter, breathing hard. That's when Ethan strolled in, messy hair, yawning like he'd had the best sleep of his life. He grabbed the orange juice, saw me, and smirked. "Oh, look." The stray cat crawled back in. That was it. I snapped. "You can't keep doing this, Ethan. One day what?" He poured his juice, leaning against the counter, sipping leisurely. "You'll finally tell on me. Go ahead. They won't believe you. They never do." And he was right. Mom shot me a warning look. "Don't start a fight first thing in the morning, Noah." It was a crushing realization. Ethan wasn't just cruel. He was protected. He knew it. He wore their favoritism like armor, knowing I would always be blamed. It was the unspoken rule, Ethan was the chosen one. I was the scapegoat. But the real betrayal, the true fracture, came a few days later. I'd been saving every spare dollar from my coffee shop job and freelance work. Over $1,500. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Proof that I wasn't completely powerless. A way out. One afternoon, I checked my account. It was nearly empty. $137. My stomach dropped. My fingers trembled as I scrolled. Multiple transfers, all to my parents' joint account. I couldn't breathe. I stormed into the living room where Dad was watching TV. "Where's my money?" I demanded, phone in hand. He barely looked up. "Relax. We moved it." "You moved it?" My voice cracked. "That was my savings. Months of work. You can't just take it." Dad sighed, like I was an annoying child. "Don't be dramatic. We needed it for Ethan. He's joining a travel soccer team and the fees aren't cheap. You don't need the money right now." "He does." I stared at him, my chest tight. "You stole from me." "It's not stealing," Mom chimed in from the doorway. "It's family money. You're part of this household. You don't get to act like you're separate." The ground tilted beneath me. All those late nights, every shift, just to squirrel away a little independence. Gone. Not just gone, but handed directly to the brother who had thrown me outside. And Ethan knew. That night at dinner, he leaned over, smirking. "Thanks for sponsoring my season, loser." Something inside me fractured. Not the usual quiet hurt I'd carried for years. Not the slow ache of being overlooked. This was different. This was betrayal so sharp it felt like a knife to the spine. My parents hadn't just ignored me. They had actively chosen him, drained me, left me with nothing. And Ethan had laughed in my face for it. That night, lying awake, staring at the ceiling, I felt a fundamental shift. The grief, the humiliation, it hardened. For the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt clarity. They had shown me exactly where I stood. Not as a son, not as a brother, not even as a person with rights. Just a resource to be used. And once I saw that truth, I knew I couldn't go back to swallowing it. Something had to change. I just didn't know yet how fast that change was coming. A storm was brewing in that house. One louder and more destructive than anyone could have expected. And when it hit, it wouldn't just rattle us. It would shake the entire neighborhood awake. Rock bottom, I've learned, doesn't always come with a single dramatic crash. Sometimes it creeps up like a tide, higher and higher until you suddenly realize you're drowning. After they took my money, something inside me just stopped fighting openly. For weeks, when Ethan mocked me or my parents dismissed me, I didn't argue. I felt hollow, carved out. Every morning I'd get up, go to work, come home, and exist in silence. Ethan noticed, of course. He thrived on my reactions, and when I stopped giving them to him, he pushed harder. He'd knock on my door late at night just to wake me, laughing when I opened it. He'd leave my clothes in the yard after pulling them from the hamper. Once, he even accidentally spilled soda all over the laptop I'd saved for, the one I bought before they raided my account. My mom just sighed. "Accidents happen, Noah. Don't make it a big deal." But the worst part wasn't Ethan's cruelty. It was the emptiness at the dinner table. The way my parents leaned in when he spoke, nodding, asking questions, smiling. When I tried to join the conversation, they cut me off. If I mentioned work, Dad would grunt. If I brought up school, Mom would glance at Ethan and change the subject. I was a ghost in my own home, visible only when they needed something from me. One night, especially, stands out. It was late, maybe 11 p.m. I was at the kitchen table, homework spread out. Finals were coming up, and I was desperate to hold on to some achievement, something that was still mine. Ethan walked in, grabbed my notebook, started flipping through the pages. "Wow," he said mockingly. "You really think this matters? You're wasting your time. You'll never be anything. Dad says you're just book smart. No real life skills. You'll be working at that coffee shop forever." I snatched the notebook back, my hands shaking. "At least I'm doing something. At least I'm trying." He leaned close, smirking. "Trying doesn't mean anything if nobody cares." And that's when I saw them. My parents. Standing in the doorway. They'd heard every word. For a split second, I thought, maybe this time. Maybe they'd finally say something. Finally, stand up for me, but Dad just chuckled. "Ethan's got a point. Don't waste your life, Noah." Mom smiled faintly and nodded. I can't explain that feeling. The floor just gave out beneath me, and I kept falling long after I hit the ground. It wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was confirmation. They believed him. They saw me as nothing more than a placeholder, someone who would never measure up to their golden child. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by my window, staring at the streetlights. Out there, kids were sneaking home after hanging out with friends. Families were laughing over late-night snacks. People actually cared for each other. And I realized I was never going to have that in this house. Not as long as I kept trying to earn something they'd already decided I didn't deserve. So, I started planning. Not revenge yet, not truly, but escape. Quietly. Carefully. I picked up more shifts at work without telling them. Cash tips went into a new secret stash. I volunteered for closing shifts so I could stay out longer, breathe longer before returning to that house. I started researching cheap apartments, looking at rental boards online when no one was watching. It wasn't easy. Ethan snooped constantly. My parents still had a habit of borrowing my things, so I got creative. Cash went into old notebooks Ethan would never touch. I told my parents I was at the library when really I was with a friend who'd agreed to help me find housing. But every time I made progress, something dragged me back down. One evening, I came home to find Ethan on my bed, scrolling through my phone. He guessed my passcode, my birthday. He grinned, waving it at me. "Looking for apartments, huh? Where are you going to go, loser? You can't afford anything. You'll come crawling back." My stomach twisted with panic. "Give it back," I said, my voice low. He laughed, tossing it onto the bed. "Relax. I'm not telling them yet. But maybe I will if you annoy me." That threat hung over me like a guillotine. From then on, I was more careful, more paranoid. Every step toward freedom felt like one Ethan could snatch away with a smirk. And yet, the more they pushed me down, the more determined I became. I worked harder, saved more, kept my head down. On the outside, I was quiet, compliant, beaten down. But inside, something was building. A slow fire, fed by every insult, every theft, every betrayal. I didn't know it then, but all of this, the stolen money, the broken trust, the years of silence, was pushing me toward a breaking point. And it was coming soon. Not in silence this time, but in a way that shook the walls, startled the neighbors, and drew flashing red and blue lights down our quiet suburban street. It's strange how sometimes the lowest point can quietly become the turning point. After weeks of feeling like a ghost in my own home, something shifted. Not with my family, no. They were as cruel and dismissive as ever. But with me. I stopped looking at their approval like a prize I could win. Instead, I started to treat my situation like a test. If no one in that house would value me, then I'd damn well find value somewhere else. The first real step upward came through work. My coffee shop job. For so long, it was just a way to scrape by, to buy myself tiny scraps of freedom. But then one evening, covering a closing shift, my manager pulled me aside. "Noah," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "You're reliable. You show up on time. You don't complain. You don't slack off. I could use someone like you to help train the new hires." It wasn't much, a bump in responsibility, a few more hours, but to me, it felt monumental. Someone trusted me. Someone recognized my effort without comparing me to Ethan or brushing me off. I took that little promotion seriously. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I had a future. With the extra hours, my cash stash started to grow again. I didn't dare open another bank account in my name. My parents had proven they'd dip their hands into it without hesitation. So, I started using prepaid cards, loading small amounts, tucking them into hidden spots. My favorite, an old cereal box in my closet. Ethan would never touch that boring brand. But it wasn't just the money growing. I'd been doing little freelance projects online, graphic design, essay editing. Then one of my clients reached out with bigger work. "You've got talent," she said over the phone. "If you want, I can connect you with others." I said yes immediately. Within a month, I was balancing coffee shop shifts with steady freelance income. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Meanwhile, Ethan was slipping. His travel soccer team, the one my stolen savings helped fund, wasn't going well. He complained constantly, skipped practices, got benched. My parents, of course, coddled him. "He just needs time," Mom would say. "The coach doesn't appreciate his talent." I watched it all unfold with a quiet, internal satisfaction. For the first time, I could see the cracks forming in their golden boy's image. At school, too, things began to shift. I kept my head down, focused on my grades. A teacher nominated me for a scholarship program. I didn't tell my family. I didn't want to give them the chance to sabotage it. But privately, I poured myself into the application late at night. It felt like building a bridge out of stone, one piece at a time, toward a place where they couldn't reach me. Even small victories felt like triumphs. When Ethan mocked me for bringing home leftover pastries from the coffee shop, I ignored him and shared them with friends. When Dad scoffed at my freelance work, "That's not real money, Noah. Get serious." I bit my tongue and let him think I was wasting time. All while my client list doubled. Their words stopped cutting so deep because I had proof. Real proof. I wasn't who they said I was. The strangest part was how my silence began to unnerve them. Ethan especially. He was used to me snapping back, to me defending myself, to me giving him something to push against. But when I stopped giving him that satisfaction, he grew restless. He'd try harder, throwing my things around, making snide comments at dinner. But when I didn't react, his smirk faltered. I'd catch him watching me, confusion flickering in his eyes. He couldn't understand why his usual tricks weren't working. My parents noticed, too. One night, Mom asked, "Why are you so quiet these days?" I just shrugged. Nothing to say. But inside, I was smiling. The power dynamic was shifting, even if they didn't realize it yet. My silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was strategy. And opportunities began to stack up. The scholarship program called me for an interview. My freelance earnings were enough to cover a few months' rent. I even started looking at used cars, imagining the day I could drive away for good. But the most important change wasn't money or recognition. It was me. The fire they'd smothered for years had finally sparked again. I wasn't just surviving. I was building. Quietly, carefully, but with immense purpose. I didn't tell them any of it, of course. Let them think I was still the invisible son, the one they could overlook, the one Ethan could taunt without consequence. Because the truth was, I had something they couldn't see. Momentum. And momentum, once it starts rolling, is almost impossible to stop. I just didn't realize how quickly that momentum would collide with their world, because soon all the pieces I'd been setting into place would line up. One small push would send everything crashing down. Not just for Ethan. For my parents, too. And when it happened, it wouldn't be quiet. It would be loud enough that the entire neighborhood would hear. The setup for what was coming didn't feel like a dramatic discovery at first. It crept up slowly, like a storm gathering before the sky cracks open. All those little steps I'd been taking, working extra hours, freelancing, applying for scholarships, they were pieces of a bigger puzzle. I didn't even realize I was building it until I suddenly saw how they all connected. It started with that scholarship interview. I remember sitting in a quiet classroom after school, palms sweating as the panel asked me questions. I told them about my work ethic, the coffee shop, juggling responsibilities with good grades. I didn't mention my family. I didn't want pity. I wanted them to see my determination. When I walked out, I didn't know if I'd impressed them, but I felt lighter. For once, I'd been able to speak about myself without being overshadowed by Ethan or dismissed by my parents. A week later, an envelope came. My mom tossed it onto the counter without a second glance. I tore it open in my room and nearly dropped it when I read the words, "Congratulations, you've been selected." It wasn't a full ride, but it was substantial, enough to cover tuition for my first year of college. Something I'd secretly worried I'd never afford. I told no one. Not Ethan, not my parents. I tucked the letter into the back of my desk drawer, locking it away like a treasure, because I knew if they found out, they'd twist it. Either claim it as family money again, or worse, belittle it until it lost its shine. No, this was mine. And it gave me something even more valuable than money. Leverage. I finally had proof I wasn't the nothing they painted me to be. Around the same time, my freelance work took an unexpected turn. One client, a small business owner, loved my designs so much, he offered me a steady contract. It wasn't huge, but it was consistent. He even said, "If you ever want to turn this into a career, you could. You've got the skill." Hearing that lit something inside me. For so long, my family told me I had no real-life skills. That I'd amount to nothing beyond that coffee shop. But here was someone outside their toxic circle telling me I had worth. The money started stacking up faster than I expected. Between the coffee shop, the freelance work, and now the scholarship, I wasn't just surviving. I was building an exit plan. I could see the outlines of it, a small apartment, maybe even a used car, and a future where Ethan's voice was just a faint echo in my memory. But the real setup, the part that would eventually turn everything upside down, came one night when I overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. It was late. I was just home from a closing shift. The lights were on in the living room and I paused by the stairs. My parents' voices were low, serious. "He's not focused," Dad was saying. "The coach already called me twice. If Ethan doesn't shape up, he'll lose his spot." Mom's voice was tight. "We've already invested so much money. The travel fees, the gear, it's too late to pull him out now. He has to make it work. If he doesn't, how will it look? What will people say?" I stood frozen on the steps, listening. And then I heard something that made my blood run cold. "Maybe Noah can cover the rest," Mom said. "He's been working so much lately. He can contribute. He should contribute." Dad grunted in agreement. "It's all family money in the end. He doesn't need much for himself." I gripped the railing until my knuckles turned white. There it was again. That assumption that whatever I earned, whatever I built, belonged to them. To Ethan. I wasn't a person with goals or needs. I was a resource to be mined until there was nothing left. But this time, instead of despair, I felt something sharper. Clarity. They were showing me their playbook. They were so confident in their favoritism, so sure of my silence, they didn't even bother to hide it. And in that moment, I realized something important. If they saw me as a resource, then I could turn that expectation against them. I went upstairs quietly, heart pounding, mind racing. That conversation replayed over and over. And the more I thought about it, the more a plan began to form. They expected me to keep giving, to keep sacrificing, to keep being invisible. But what if I didn't? What if I took everything I'd been building, the scholarship, the savings, the freelance work, and used it in a way they'd never see coming? It was the first time I truly thought about revenge. Not just escape. Not loud, reckless revenge, but something quiet, calculated, like the way they had slowly drained me over the years. I would take what I had learned in silence, in invisibility, and use it as leverage. And when the moment came, when their entire world depended on me in a way they didn't expect, I would be ready. The funny thing about rock bottom is that once you've been there, you stop being afraid of losing. That gave me power. That gave me freedom. And as I lay awake that night, listening to Ethan snoring down the hall, I felt the momentum building again. None of us knew yet, not me, not Ethan, not my parents, how quickly everything was going to collide. And when it did, it wouldn't just be a family squabble. It would be public, loud, messy, the kind of chaos neighbors whisper about for years. Revenge didn't come in a single dramatic explosion. It came in stages, carefully, quietly, the way I'd been forced to live for years. And maybe that's what made it so effective. I didn't storm into the living room screaming. I didn't shove evidence in their faces. No, I played their game. Silence. Patience. Precision. Until the moment was right. The first step was simple: stop being their resource. For months, they'd assumed my money, my time, my work, belonged to Ethan's dreams. I flipped that assumption without warning. At the coffee shop, I started routing my paychecks to those prepaid cards instead of the shared bank account they monitored. The first time Dad asked casually, "How much did you bring in this week? We need to cover Ethan's tournament fee." I just shrugged. "Oh, ours got cut." He didn't question it, just sighed and grumbled about bad management. Ethan, of course, noticed the shift. "Why aren't you giving me rides anymore?" he sneered one morning when I refused to chauffeur him to practice. "I'm working later now," I said flatly. "Can't." He shoved me against the wall, but I didn't rise to it. I just stared back. Calm. Steady. Unflinching. It rattled him more than if I'd fought back. The real blow, though, came with the scholarship. Remember how my parents had been banking on me to fund Ethan's career? I let them believe I was still broke, still stuck. But behind the scenes, I was meeting with the scholarship committee, finalizing my acceptance, preparing my exit. I knew that when it came out, the contrast would be brutal. Ethan, failing on the field, costing them money. While I, their despair, was being given opportunities they never thought I deserved. But I wasn't content with just leaving. No. I wanted them to feel it, to taste for once what it was like to be powerless. That chance came sooner than I expected. One Saturday morning, I woke to shouting downstairs. Ethan had been benched again. The coach had called my dad, saying if Ethan didn't shape up, he'd be off the team completely. My parents were furious. Not at Ethan, mind you, but at the coach, at the system, at anyone they could blame. By the time I walked into the kitchen, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Dad turned to me, his jaw tight. "Noah, you need to cover the new fees. If Ethan's going to prove himself, he needs to attend this extra training camp. It's $800. I blinked at him slowly. I don't have it. His voice rose. Don't lie to me. You've been working non-stop. Where's the money going? Rent, I said evenly. The word hit the room like a dropped glass. My mom froze, spatula still in hand. Rent? What rent? I'm moving out, I said, calm and steady. End of the month. Ethan laughed, sharp and cruel. You move out with what money? Don't make me laugh. I didn't even look at him. I pulled the scholarship letter from my backpack and slid it across the table to my parents. With this, tuition's covered. Between work and freelancing, I'll cover the rest. I don't need anything from you. The silence was electric. My mom's hand shook as she picked up the letter. Dad's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing. He couldn't find words. And Ethan? Ethan's smirk faltered for the first time in years. You, he stammered, pointing at me. You can't just leave. Who's going to pay for your soccer? I cut him off, my voice sharp now. Not me. Not anymore. You're on your own. The rage that flickered across his face was almost satisfying enough. Almost. But the real satisfaction came when Dad slammed his fist on the table. You're abandoning your family, he barked. I leaned forward, meeting his glare without flinching. No, you abandoned me a long time ago. I'm just finally walking away. The argument exploded. Ethan shouted. My mom pleaded. My dad accused. But I stayed calm, collected. Every word measured. Years of being silenced had taught me how to control my tone, how to let silence stretch until it was unbearable. And that silence made my words hit harder. By the time I walked out of the kitchen, letter tucked back into my bag, I knew I had shifted the power dynamic completely. For once, they couldn't use me. They couldn't drain me. And worse for them, they knew I was slipping out of their control. But the revenge wasn't finished. Because what happened next wasn't just about me leaving. It was about the house itself, the neighborhood, the reputation they clung to so desperately. And when that final piece fell into place, it wouldn't just be my family hearing it. It would be everyone within earshot. The true fallout began the night before I was set to move out. I'd kept my plan quiet, folding clothes into boxes after late shifts, sneaking bags into my friend's car little by little. By then, I had enough saved for a small studio apartment, and the scholarship gave me the security I needed. Everything was set. But Ethan, as always, couldn't let things end quietly. I was taping up the last box when he barged into my room without knocking. His face was red, eyes wild. You're not going anywhere, he snapped. Mom and Dad said, this is your home. You can't just walk out. I didn't even look up. Watch me. That set him off. He lunged, grabbed the box out of my hands, tearing it open, scattering my clothes across the floor. You think you're better than me now? You think you can just leave and make me look like an idiot? I stood slowly, keeping my voice calm. You don't need my help to look like an idiot, Ethan. You've managed that all on your own. His face twisted with rage. Before I could step back, he shoved me hard against the wall. My head hit the plaster with a dull thud. For a moment, stars danced in my vision. But when I blinked them away, I saw something else. My parents. Standing in the doorway. Watching. Just like they had that night he dragged me into the yard. Only this time, I didn't crawl. I pushed Ethan off me with a force that surprised even myself. Touch me again, I said, my voice slow, steady, and you'll regret it. He laughed, but it was shaky, unconvincing. What are you going to do? Call the cops. They'll believe me, not you. They always do. That's when I pulled my phone out of my pocket. No, I said simply, because I already recorded everything. His smirk vanished. I had been careful for weeks. Every insult, every shove, every demand for money. I had recordings, screenshots, even copies of the bank transfers where my savings had mysteriously moved into their account. I'd kept them hidden, waiting for the moment I might need them. And now, standing there in that suffocating room, I knew it was time. I dialed. When the knock came at the front door 20 minutes later, the sound echoed through the entire house. Red and blue lights flashed through the curtains. Neighbors peeked from porches and windows as two officers stepped inside. Ethan's bravado crumbled instantly. He stammered, tried to twist the story, but I just played the recordings aloud. His voice, mocking, cruel, filled the living room while the officers' faces hardened. My parents tried to intervene, voices overlapping, but the cops shut them down. "You let this happen," one of them demanded. "You stood by while your son was assaulted." For once, their silence wasn't protection. It was condemnation. The officers didn't care about golden children or family favoritism. They cared about evidence. And I had plenty. Ethan was handcuffed right there in front of our neighbors, his protests drowned out by the clink of metal. My parents stood frozen, pale, and trembling. Their perfect family image shattering in the glow of police lights. Whispers spread across the street. Phones lifted to record. The story was already weaving itself into neighborhood gossip. As they led Ethan out, he turned his head, eyes blazing with hatred. "You ruined me," he spat. I met his glare, my voice calm. "No, Ethan, you ruined yourself. I just stopped covering for you." The officers nodded at me, one of them muttering, "You did the right thing." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. I didn't wait around for the rest. I grabbed my last box, stepped past my parents' stunned faces, and walked out into the cool night. The air felt different. Lighter. Sharper. Behind me, the flashing lights bathed the house I'd grown up in, a place that had never truly been home, in colors that looked almost like fire. Neighbors stared, some whispering, some nodding at me with something like respect. I didn't care. I was done living for their approval or anyone else's. As I slid into my friend's car, box on my lap, I glanced back one last time. My parents stood on the porch, small and powerless, watching as their golden son was driven away in the back of a squad car. For years, they had told me I was nothing. But in that moment, with the neighborhood awake, the police lights flashing, and their world collapsing, I realized the truth. I had been their scapegoat, their shadow, their expendable one. But now I was free. And they would never forget the night they lost everything. All because the son they ignored finally stood up. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever faced something like this, where you finally had to stand up for yourself against people who should have loved you unconditionally? Tell me what you think, I really want to know.